Well, we have a really important program today, so thank you for making time, Dave Parker, to come out and present to us and being gracious with everything else that we had going on. So I'm going to get this technology going.
Thank you. This is my button here.
I think that should be. Let's test it and find out.
Perfect. Thank you. It feels weird to, I haven't given a live presentation in probably a year and a half. And I'm very comfortable in my Zoom world to give a presentation and talk to folks. So I'm going to try and keep rolling here. As I was sitting, I was asked 2 or 3 great questions about the school district. So I also want to just open it up. If you have questions, just keep them in there and I'll answer them as we move through. My job today was really just to kind of answer this question, like, how are the schools doing? This is kind of a graph of how our year's gone. We started July 1st where we were down under 70 cases per 100,000. And we started planning of how we were going to enter into a normal school year. And then you see August and September coming here, and we saw waves of sickness coming to our school district. We started coming out of that in December and started making plans for how to enter into a normal year. And then we have the Omicron surge, which also changed. We're now back into these are numbers that we haven't seen since April of 2020. So there's lots of things going on in the school district, and we're kind of getting excited about where we might go. Just so you have a notion of some of the things going on, between the start of school and December 31st, we had 41 staff members who had COVID and about 344 students who had COVID. My next slide has some of the challenges that we had during that period of time. But this is what happened from January 1st on. We had 220 of our 725 staff members got COVID in that month. We had almost 800 students come down with COVID. We had about 5,700 total students. This was something that we've never seen before. Some of the challenge, and then the good news is right now, I was at 0 staff sick for almost 3 weeks. And we have, as of yesterday, we had 2 staff who came down with COVID. I checked with one of them and it wasn't a severe case. He's already back at school, wearing his mask, and 3 students as we came back from spring break. So we're definitely seeing some changes. Some of the challenges that we've had this year. For the first time in my 30 years since Measure 5 passed in 1993, money is not our issue. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but with the student investment account and some of the reinvestment that our legislators have made, money that's not our issue. Our issue this year is we could not hire people. We had a critical staff shortage. We had positions that we had money, we were ready to start paying people that we just couldn't fill. We still haven't filled some of those positions. If you know a speech pathologist, we will hire them today. Get me their name. We also had critical substitute shortages along with the staff piece. One of the big issues that we had is we just didn't have subs. And so they changed some rules at the state level. So we basically began to loosen the rules around what kind of schooling did you need to become a substitute. And we started to use our classified employees who have educations and who are currently aides in our classroom, know our kids. We started making them subs. We had I think we ended up with like 75 of our staff members who were already working in our buildings who we began to sub for. And certainly at the beginning of the year, that was a real issue for us, is just trying to cover the subs. From January through the end of February, it was off the charts. Basically, my whole district office, I was walking halls doing security. Everybody in the district office was out. If you had a license, you were subbing. We had, I mean, unprecedented kind of how we had to marshal together to just keep schools open. In the end, we had a period there where we closed our secondary schools, middle and high school, just because we could not get enough teachers to run school. So we went to CDL for about 2 weeks, and then people healed up and we came on back. Pretty much for our staff, it's been tremendous stress. Part of it was, I think, just the managing of masks and some of the pandemic protocols that we put into place. It just is harder. Like, everything is harder in the classroom. So what we began to do was throw back pretty much all of the professional development time where we would start to learn new things. We pushed it right back to the staff as prep. So most of our folks, any free time is pretty much pushed back to staff and said, just do what you need to do to keep moving forward. On March 14th, we moved back to voluntary masking, and I can tell you that right now, I was out in the high school yesterday, it's probably about 1/3 of the kids are still wearing masks. And I've been really happy with the response to this. We met with basically the teachers at the K through 6 level, all of the classroom teachers met with their kids and just walked over this. It's like, it's whatever your family wants to do, we're good with that. If you want to wear a mask and you feel safer about that, great. If you don't want to wear a mask, that's great too. We just want to make sure that everybody has that choice and that we're not going to be picking on each other just because of a choice that you or your family are making. So far, that's worked. I haven't heard. I mean, so far, that's going okay. I was walking through the middle school a couple of days ago, and again, kids are just choosing. You know, the other smart thing that I see is that people think about masks and some of these health protocols as all or nothing. And I think what we've learned over the 2 years that we've been here is there's times when, like when you're walking out into the cafeteria and I have 800 kids there, you may want to wear a mask there, at least while you're not eating. When you're in a classroom with 20 other kids and 3 kids in the school district have COVID, you're probably pretty safe in that classroom. I haven't talked about ventilation coming up here, but it's just been a really interesting couple of years as we've tried to move through it. This is kind of this is the 7-day trend. These are graphs that we look at all the time. It's actually gone down further from there. We're actually under, last time I looked it was 78, but I know as I was walking in, somebody mentioned that in Washington County it's now under 3 per 100,000, which is a number that is awesome. We want to stay right there. I met with Washington County Health. We meet weekly. They just canceled our meetings. We're only meeting monthly now. That's great news for us. The second thing is that they're not expecting, with this new variant, they are expecting some cases to go up, but they're not expecting it to impact our health systems, which means that we aren't going to be changing our protocols, which for us in schools, I just want to keep moving right now. I don't want to go make a change and have to deal with all of the politics that goes around that. This is kind of the pediatric curve, so you can see this hasn't really impacted kids until the Delta and now the Omicron surges, and it was impacting our kids. Now the good news for them is that of my almost 1,000 people who got sick in my district, not one went to the hospital. So that tells you a little bit about kind of what some of the vaccination and some of the other things that folks are working on, and just as Omicron evolved. They were sick. Most of it was between 5 and 7 days is where someone would be out, but nobody ended up in the hospital. That's kind of the split by age group, and again, our high schoolers were probably more impacted, mostly in a secondary school, trying to keep kids away from each other. It's impossible. I mean, I think, again, kids really became better. They had a better understanding of what caused sickness. And so kids were pretty smart, even though they were close to each other. They kind of understood, you know, when they started walking in the halls, lots of kids would mask up and that kind of thing. I want to talk just briefly about ventilation because, again, this isn't going away. And like they said, this other variant is coming. And so how are we going to deal with it? One of the things that we did right at the beginning, it has to do with ventilation. Because of masks, if things got serious again, we would go back to masks. But even more importantly right now is ventilation in schools. And the basic gist is there's a whole bunch of science behind it. I'm a chemistry major, and so it was actually fun for me to break out my science degree and start learning a little more about ventilation. And believe it or not, PSU has one of the foremost world-renowned ventilation experts who are associated with it. So what we're looking for is basically 6 air changes per hour, which is in a room we would want the total volume of this to change 6 times in an hour. That is what they would consider to be ideal for not transmitting disease in a space. We went through and tested. We went to the buildings where people said we have the worst ventilation, and then we checked through the rooms. What we found is even in the worst rooms, we had about 5.8 air changes per hour. We also, during the very beginning with some of these federal stimulus monies, we purchased a HEPA filter for every single classroom that adds 2.4 air changes per hour. So we're upwards of about 8.2 air changes per hour in even the worst rooms in our school. And that's still one of the biggest impacts that we have in trying to keep people safe. One of the things we were talking about earlier, it was my last meeting, is doors. The other thing that we did was we maximized the amount of outside air being pushed into the school. Normally that costs money because you have to reheat that air, but in these times we just want to get fresh air into the buildings and move it. But by moving all that extra fresh air, it now blows all the doors open. So we had to go back through and readjust all of the hinges and all of because of all of our doors are blowing open all the time because of the extra air that is flowing through there. So this will still be, kids still have the choice to wear a mask. We will still be pushing the maximum amount of ventilation. With our federal stimulus monies, we're going to end up investing, it's to redo, like the HEPA filters cost me $400 or $500 a piece. To redo a ventilation system is millions of dollars at this school. And so we're taking on kind of projects where we can invest money and see a big impact, but we actually have more work to do around ventilation in schools. Okay, the newspaper article, because everybody wants to know where kids at. And so I wanted to just briefly talk about kind of where kids came in. In that 2 years, we had basically 2 years where kids were either CDL, online, or they were hybrid, where they were online part of the time and in person the other part of the time. It had an impact. Kids, what I've got here, and I won't go too far into it, but you'll get the point, which is, this is kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. We've got the fall where they came in testing, and this is just our regular kind of reading assessment. Math is pretty similar, the numbers don't look terribly different. Coming in, about 60% of our kids were behind. They would be what we would call needing intervention, where we would be pulling out a student to give them extra reading, or there's different interventions that we run. Between fall and winter, during this period of time, we had all of our kids in, and our teachers began to work with them. Well, I'll get to that in a second. We saw growth. Kids are getting better. As a matter of fact, we're seeing weird growth in individual kids where they went from urgent intervention to at benchmark over 3 or 4 months. Meaning that once we got them great instruction, got them going, they started to figure out these pieces and got going. But the concerning thing is still, we're 50% of our kids coming out of the pandemic who are behind. And this holds in the K1, 2, 2, 3, 4. It holds 5, 6. We don't do this kind of testing in secondary grades, but I venture to bet that they're still, I have nothing to say that those kids aren't behind too. And the interesting thing about this is that what we have to do is we have to look at this in a different way because of, if it's 50% of our kids, that means K through 6, that's 1,500 kids. And if I was going to intervene on this, I'm going to pull out a set of kids, I'm going to hire a teacher, I'm going to have that teacher work with them. That's 65 staff members, $6.5 million worth of extra hiring I would do to try and fix that problem that way. That's not how we'll go about trying to solve this. The way we look at it is a thing called multi-tiered systems of support, which is there's instruction that every kid gets. That's what we call tier 1 or core instruction. And then there's usually somewhere around 15% of the kids who need a little bit more. And we would work out some tier 2 interventions for this. A lot of times these are like different reading groups inside of the classroom. So you've got a slower reading group and a faster reading group, and we're working different things for them specifically. And then the last is kind of this tier 3, which would be about 5% of the students normally, where there's some really very strong interventions. These would be things like, if you know dyslexia, it would be Orton-Gillingham, it would be HD Word, but some very programmatic responses to it. But for us to, and so normally if a kid was having a problem, we'd start looking at interventions. For us, we're not going to solve that problem this way. There's just no way, it's too large. So what we have to look at is what are we doing different in the core? And for teachers, that's going to be the big thing, which is how do we ensure that things that kids don't have, that we're reteaching it before we move on. And for teachers, there's some letting go, because of like at the secondary level, if you're teaching Algebra 1, you're supposed to get through Chapter 5. And we're going to have to change our thinking about that right now, because if you can't teach somebody about multiplication who doesn't know how to add yet. And so as we're moving through this, we're going to have to really look at what's the core instruction and how are we changing it. It came up at the board meeting the other night around ELL students. ELL students, when we pull out a second language student and give them instruction, that's like 30 minutes of the day. The rest of their school day, 6.5 hours, if we're not giving them some kind of support in the core, then they're not going to learn that second language quickly and efficiently. So I wanted to give you this idea because it's a real important concept, because a lot of people just start talking about how are we going to intervene. It's not going to just, we are going to intervene. From the federal monies, we invest about $1 million this year in interventions, which is more teachers, more classified folks to run reading groups and the rest. But the problem's bigger than that. And so the other thing that's going on is when you all grew up, there were two kinds of reading thoughts. One was called balanced literacy, one was called phonics. And balanced literacy was this notion that if I get you things that you want to read, you're going to read more. And you're going to understand more because you want it. And then there would be cueing built into this where I don't know what that word is, so I look at the picture and then I try to guess what the word is from the picture. So in the last 10 years, that science has decided which of those two is superior. And it's not balanced literacy. Explicit phonics, which is teaching kids to connect representations to sounds, that is the way kids learn. And even more importantly, the more at risk you are, the more explicit phonics you need. So one of the things that's happening this year is we're about to adopt a brand new K-6 literacy curriculum. And it's a explicit phonics-based curriculum recommended by ODE, also adopted by Newburgh and I think Beaverton, some other districts. So it's not a different thing, but it's going to have, again, a huge impact on what this core instruction looks like. And the kids are getting what they need to be able to catch up and move forward. Next steps. So for the district, we got to get this literacy adopted, and then I have to teach 150 teachers how to use it. So that's kind of our August and fall. Actually, it'll be most of next year. They'll be doing professional development around it. We got to hire additional intervention staff. We are going to be doing more pullouts, and so we've got to have folks who can sit down and read with kids and are trained to know how to help them move forward. And then continue with this, what we call 100% and 20% meetings, which is every 6 weeks, our teachers meet and they talk about every kid and where they're at reading-wise. And they start to look at what do we need to do different. In the 100% meetings, they talk about, as a grade level in this school, what are we going to do differently to make sure kids are learning? And then they run these 20% meetings, which are the kids who need extra. They talk about them individually, and they actually track. Jimmy has this intervention. How is it going? Who's running it? What are the scores? And so every kid in our system, especially K-6, we're looking at all the time. And that's going to be a very important process for us moving forward to make sure the kids don't slip through the cracks. And with that, I think that was kind of what I was going to talk about. I would take questions. One of the questions that was asked earlier was 2 years ago when I left. I mean, when the pandemic started, we had just approved the student investment account, which for us is about $4.6 million worth of extra investment pointed at risk kids, mental health, some class size, and some activity stuff. But one of the questions is, how's that going? We passed this new tax. What does it look like? Well, what I can report to you is this. We hired 9 more counselors. Basically, our district, there's an organization called ASPA, which is the American Association of Counselors, ASCA, excuse me. And they have a recommendation, and they've had it for 30 years, of 250 students per counselor. Nobody in Oregon comes close to meeting. It's always 400, 350. We're now very close to meeting the ASCA recommendations on counselors. And so what that means is they're working with parents, they're working with kids. We've got 3 mental health coordinators. And during the pandemic, this has been very helpful. They basically work with families. When kids are either suicidal or there's mental health worries, they'll start meeting with families, start connecting them to outside resources, but helping us walk through. We hired in 3.5 FTE for ELL, so that we've got more folks out in our schools working with our second language kids. We hired in a bunch of band, music, PE with this money. And part of it was because we were uneven across the district, so we wanted to make sure the kids were still getting access to music, PE, and some of these pieces. So that was hired in with this money. It's been incredibly useful. One of the things I'm working on right now is expanding the alternative school. Currently, it sits out at Taylor Way, which is across 47 near the wetlands. And there's 3 staff members, no administration. There is a counselor. They have this little, the whole school is not much bigger than this space right here, including hallway and 2 classrooms. So you can imagine kind of the width of those classrooms. And in a 2,000 student high school, I can tell you there's at least 200 kids who could use alternative instruction. Currently, we have about 40. So one of the things we're doing this year, coming into next year with this money, is to expand into, that run over, not too bad, expand that program and to begin to invest into it, because there are a lot of kids. And I will say, I talked a lot about elementary here. Secondary-wise, it's about graduating. And the first year of the pandemic, those kids were basically already there. The second year, and now this is the 3rd year of this set of kids, they're it's not good. We're working very hard to get kids to that finish line. Next year is also going to be another very, very hard year of trying to get kids to the finish line. One of the things we did with the federal stimulus money is we actually hired in a whole other teacher just to help catching kids up. So we actually have 2.0, I want to say almost 180 kids who are now doing extra courses through these extra teachers to get themselves to that finish line because of what happened during that pandemic. So. And I take any questions. I know we're past time, so.
We have time for one question. Michael?
Yeah, do you have room for codgers and crones
Yeah.
as volunteers?
Yeah. Volunteers has been a little bit sketchy for us so far. We're doing some of it, but what I can tell you is that I like hiring retired guys because they come to work every day. So what I would tell you is we have IA positions where you can begin to work with kids, and we have positions from like 2 hours a day up to full time. So there's lots of, I think next year you'll see us come in with a more, as long as we don't go and do anything crazy, I think you'll see us come in with a more vibrant volunteer, and that might be a little more. What I've heard from my staff so far is that we're open, they're just so tired. They're like, we just want to get through the year. Don't throw anything new at us. Don't just let us get to the end, and then we'll pick it up and start going from there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.